Welcome back to From My Heart. We are glad you have chose to be with us today. Tonight we have a special guest, Nick Watts, who is the Minister of Music at Bacon Heights Baptist Church. We that going to be sharing information about the church and the events that are going on this fall. Then we will also be discussing the emotional issue that has touched many lives, including the life of our guest, that it is a subject of suicide. Nick, let's start the events that are occurring at Bacon Heights.
Well, right now, we have a couple of major events on the horizon, one being a 50th anniversary for Bacon Heights, which was established back in 1967. So on November 12th, we'll be bringing back a lot of the former staff and have a huge worship service that morning. And then we're working already on our Christmas music and Christmas musical this year. It's called Joy, Unspeakable Joy, and we'll be presenting that on December 10th. And then on Wednesday nights, we just have a great slate of different ministry study options. Of course, you can access that information on our website, which is baconheights.com, and we'd sure invite you to do that.
Sounds like a busy time at Bacon Heights. And what is the address of Bacon Heights?
5110 54th, and it's just easier to say 54th and Slide.
Okay, yeah, that'll be a lot easier for people to find it. And this is in Lubbock, Texas. Now, there's another subject that we want to give Nick ample time to discuss with our radio audience, and that's the subject of suicide. Nick has had opportunities to speak to various groups about this subject. And if you don't mind, could you begin by telling us why this is an important issue for you personally, and then go on by telling the radio audience what information you feel that they need to know for awareness and information?
Wow, that's a lot of information to share with you. The specific reason that this topic is very close to home is because it happened in our home. Prior to May of 2013, we were probably like most people. We didn't think of suicide much. It never came up in conversation. Like everyone else, we would hear about it. A teenager who had taken their life, maybe at a local high school, and of course we would grieve, but again, it was removed from us, and so it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. But then on May 13th, 2013, we had quite a tragedy take place at our house. That day, the earth shifted underneath our feet, and we've never been the same since. My wife's name is Michelle. We've been married for 32 years. She's a school teacher in Friendship Independent School District. And I've been in full-time ministry for, 34 years, something like that. Been at Bacon Heights for about 9 years. Anyway, we have 3 children. Kelsey is our oldest. Jordan, our son, is in the middle, and then Macy, our youngest. Macy and Kelsey. Kelsey's graduated college. Macy's still in school. Jordan was a lot like me. He loved life. He really was an old soul. He was kind of, I always called him just a true blue hippie. He slept in a hammock in his bedroom. He turned his lights on and off with, I don't know if you remember, it's called the clapper. It was back in the 70s. He found one online on Amazon or something. I think Ronco may have put it out or something like that. He loved to listen to Frank Sinatra. He was just a cool cat type of guy, and loved people with all his heart, professed his faith in Jesus Christ when he was 6 years old. And at 14, he had committed his life to full-time global missions. He really wanted to have a backpack, a Bible, and somebody drop him off on the coast of Europe, and he was going to be on his way to camp in the wilderness and just tell people about Jesus. He was that typical college-age bohemian type of mentality, and he was awesome, just awesome. And he was just getting to that age in his late teens where he and I were making that transition between father-son to man. It was a great time. But Jordan also suffered greatly from depression, and I have too. My father was a very violent alcoholic, medicated his issues with alcoholism, and finally died of alcoholism in 2000 at the age of 57. Out of that family context, I ended up suffering from depression, was diagnosed with clinical depression in 1999, and have been dealing with that ever since, through medicine and through counseling. Anyway, Jordan, when he was in junior high, began showing these same characteristics, symptoms. And so my wife specifically noticed it before I did. And so he began to, he saw a doctor, counselor. I read a great book by a guy named Neil Anderson, who made it very clear in Christianity we need both the hospital and the church, and they work in concert. I've always told my children and anybody else I counsel in regard to depression, for those people who might think you don't have enough faith if you deal with depression, I remind them that we have an entire book in the Bible called Lamentations, and you'll find a great deal of depression and discouragement throughout the Psalms and other places. Anyway, it's the world in which we live, and so we're grateful for the resources God's provided to help with that. So Jordan was diagnosed late middle school, early high school, and was really doing better. Well, he graduated high school and began going to college, and he had taken a semester off in the spring of 2013 and was working. And but he was living at home, but still kind of living the college life. We would see him, passing and going, and he'd sleep in when he was off from work, and then sleep late, and so forth and so on. It was the day after Mother's Day, May 13th of 2013. And I was at work, and my youngest daughter, Macy, was in high school at Friendship High School. And she texted me and said, "Dad, I can't find Jordan." And this was about 1 p.m. And I'm worried. And I said, "Well, he may have been up late. Maybe he's off today. I'm not sure about his schedule. So we'll continue to try to get a hold of him. Let's see what happens." 2 hours later, she texted back. This was about 3 p.m. She said, "Dad, I can't get a hold of him. None of his friends can get a hold of him. I'm very worried." I said, "Okay." So I set everything down at my office and got in the car. I always tell teenagers when I speak to them, I said, there's a reason that we parents always get upset with you when you don't answer your phone. Because it's just a default. We love you so much. We always fear the worst. We want to make sure you're okay. And so forgive us, but we worry. Right. So I was, a half of me was thinking he's fine, but the other half, like any parent, you just worry. So I, I hopped in my car and drove the 10-minute drive to the house, and I got there and his car was still in the driveway. And like a lot of people, we enter through our garage rather than our front door most of the time. So I raised the garage door, threw the back door open, and I hollered his name, and there was no answer. So I still thought, well, maybe he's asleep. And so I went to his bedroom door, and it was locked. Now, so this is when the first siren went on in my head. And I went to the kitchen and got a knife. I thought, well, maybe I can somehow get that lock open. So I ran back to his door, did get the door open, swung it open, and sorry.
That's okay. You can take your time.
I share this story every time I speak in schools, and I always think that there will come a day when I will be able to share it without getting emotional, but I guess that's going to be impossible. I threw the door open, and he had taken his life. I screamed his name over and over again, and went and grabbed his arm. I knew he had been dead for some time. I continued to scream, I ran back outside, and I collapsed on our driveway, screaming that my son is dead. My son is dead. We live on a corner, and so there are cars that come by, and a kind man in a pickup truck pulled into my driveway, and he asked me if it was okay, if I was all right, and I was screaming, my son is dead. And he called 911, and that's when the first responders and people began to show up, and it obviously became a madhouse in the ensuing minutes and hours. A lady I do not know came up and asked me where my wife was, and I told her she was teaching. She's a school teacher at school. And so she used my phone to call her, Michelle. And Michelle thought it was me because, as I said earlier, I've struggled with depression. And so she thought it was me. And the woman on the phone would not, the stranger, would not tell her what had happened. She just said, "You need to come home." And so when she finally got there, there were hundreds of people in our yard by this time, and the police and the fire truck and the ambulance. It was quite a scene. Anyway, when she was still in the left-hand turn lane to get into our driveway, I screamed that Jordan is dead, and of course she collapsed as well. And then my youngest daughter, Macy, who had texted me a few hours earlier, had been contacted, and she arrived home as well. So to answer your question, your initial question, why this topic means something to me, that's why. Part two, what I would share with people who are listening. I've been given a ministry by the Lord that I never wanted nor asked for. I've been invited by a number of public schools to speak to their students on this topic. I've spoken to a few youth groups, but by far most of it has been in the public school context. Obviously, within the first 2 years, I couldn't do that. Psychologists, you know this, have the stages of grief, shock
Right.
and denial and anger and so on. That is not an exact science. I know I spent myself 8 months in shock, and the reason I know that is because I remember waking up one day. It was very distinct, and I tried to figure out what was different. Something was clearly different, and I realized that for the first time in 8 months, I wasn't trying to undo my son's death. For 8 months, I had tried to somehow reverse time, roll back time, something, and it was exhausting. I couldn't make it through a single day without 2 or 3 naps. Your mind is working overtime while you're awake, and sometimes when you're asleep, and you have nightmares and so forth and so on. Anyway, so I was given this ministry, and I've shared with friends, because my wife and I both, on a weekly basis, at least receive one call from someone who says either I have had a loved one take their life, or usually, more often, we have friends and their loved one has taken their life. Can we please give them your name? And they almost always, end their phone call with, "Listen, if this is something you can't help with, we totally understand. If this is too much, we totally get that." And I've told several of them, here's what I've learned, and my wife and my 2 girls, our 2 girls have learned the same thing. When we go through this level of pain, when all the dust settles, and we're finally through the screaming and the hurt, and I don't know how many times wound up in the fetal position on the floor, just having meltdowns. 2 years ago, I ended up in the psychiatric ward with Covenant Medical Center, and I share that openly just because I want people to know that it's okay to hurt. We live in a world that's full of pain, and that you're not alone. That's what I want them to know. So, after all of that settles and the dust settles, I've realized it really comes down to a choice. A simple, not simple to do, but a simple choice. You can either crawl up in a ball in your pain and own that pain and be mad at the world and God for the rest of your life. And I can promise you, I was angry with God. And for a while, I went through what I call now situational atheism. For a moment when I lost my mind, I just thought, how in the world could a loving God allow something like this to happen? A 19-year-old boy who had given his life to tell people about Christ. I just don't get it. But God was so faithful and so loving, never forced himself on me. He just held me. And I'll never forget that. So you can crawl up in that and be mad at God and be bitter the rest of your life. Or you can finally, even though everything physically tells you not to, you can finally say, Lord, I'm going to trust you on this. And I realize that there are many, many, many hurting people in this world who are going to follow this same path. And it'll be my honor to be able to help them. I know that after this happened initially with us, of course we had many, many come and love us and lift us up and just sit with us because we were, catatonic, for a while and numb. But I'm telling you, man, when someone walked through that door who had lost a child, and I could see with my own eyes that they made it, that they somehow survived it, and that they not only survived it, but they're smiling. They've learned to laugh again. It just gave me hope, and hope seems to change everything. So I've been given this ministry. I've spoken to a number of schools now, and I think there are 4 or 5 in the works right now. There's a hospital, Stamford, Texas, just north of Abilene. Their hospital is partnering with their school district to allow me to come in and speak to both organizations this fall. Also, I'll be speaking at Wayland Baptist University up in Plainview at their chapel in early October, and then a number of other school districts here in the area. It's always exhausting, just like this has been, but I am able to. I always start off by, and sometimes the audiences have been between 600 and 700 students, either middle school, high school, or a combination. And I'll look at them and I'll tell them, look, I'm not a professional counselor. I'm not a psychologist. What I have is a story and some lessons I've learned from that story. And I know that I'm speaking to 2 audiences here today. The vast majority of you are those who were like me. Suicide may come up every now and then, but you really don't think about it much. And you're really just happy to be out of class. And by the time we're done, maybe you'll have a few tools in your toolbox or a few skills you can use to help people who are suicidal. And then I'll tell them, but then there's another audience who I know is here, and that's those of you who are suicidal. I know that because my son used to be in those audiences. And did I know where he was psychologically? No. But I also know this. After one of my talks that I did one day, and I spoke 3 times at a conference, so I spoke to smaller groups 3 different times. And I really wondered if I did any good at all. I kind of blubbered my way through it and just shared, kind of what I shared with you here and some other things, some practical steps on dealing with depression, what not to say to people who suffer from depression, specific intervention skills, what the, with people who I metaphorically refer to as people who are on the cliff, and you just never know what's going to be that last poke where they step off of it. I help them to know that suicide does happen, and I've seen it up close. But I try to help them remember and to know that there's hope, and that we can perhaps save a life. I've talked for a while, and so I'll take a breath and let you ask whatever you like.
Actually, I think at this point, I suspect for the radio audience also, this has been a very emotional topic that we've been discussing, and I think we're going to take a break and let us here in the studio kind of regroup, let you guys regroup, and we'll play a song.
Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Let not your heart be troubled. His tender words I hear, and resting on His goodness, I lose my doubt and fear. Though by the path He leadeth, but one step I may see. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches
I still grieve heavily for her, but I still grieve.
whenever I am tempted, whenever clouds arise, when songs give way to sighing, when hope within me dies, I draw the closer to Him. From care He set
and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For His eye is on the sparrow, and I know. And I know, and I know He watches
All right, we're coming back.
Hi, this has been quite a show, and have really received a lot of amazing information that I hope that has been helpful for you. And Nick, we thank you so much for sharing with us and your story, the information that was so needed for all of us to hear. Suicide is not something that we like to think about, but we sure need the awareness. I think we hear about it more today than we ever have, which certainly gives us an indication of what's going on in our world and what's going on with people. There are so many hurting people in this world. And, you know, even though we need to have some awareness, we need compassion, empathy, what we need mostly is God, and to lean on Him and just allow Him to be our companion and our friend. And I really appreciate that you were so willing to be open, to be so transparent. One of the things that we talked about before the show was the marriages that fail when a child dies, and you and Michelle are still together, and that is wonderful that you've gone through this together. I think so many people have trouble grieving together. Their grief is very different. Everybody's grief is very different. We go at it in a different way, and to be able to stay together through that is absolutely wonderful. We want to recap a few of the things that are going on. You can find things on baconheights.com concerning their Christmas special coming up, their 50th anniversary that's coming up. For Gary and I, we will be starting on October the 2nd, the Healing Hurts group that we're going to be doing at Redbud Baptist Church. It starts on October the 2nd. It'll last for 5 weeks. It's from 6:30 to 8. And we would love for you to come and be a part of that. You can contact us at gngministries.org or gngministries3@gmail.com. We hope that you have been blessed by this show, and really, I know it has touched lives, and it has certainly touched me. God bless, and we hope to see you next week, or hear from you next week on From My Heart. We are on Sunday nights at 8 p.m.